I still remember the day it all fell apart. The day he made me feel like nothing. That moment burned itself into my memory, a scar so deep that even time couldn't smooth it over. It was the middle of senior year, the time when high school felt more like a battle zone than a place for learning. Everyone was fighting for attention, for popularity, for dominance. I was never part of that game. I preferred my quiet corner in the library, a notebook in hand, lost in the safety of my own thoughts. But that day everything changed. It was lunchtime and the cafeteria was buzzing with noise, the kind of chaotic energy that made you feel invisible unless you were part of the crowd. I was sitting alone at the far end of the room, sketching in my notebook. Drawing had always been my escape, a place where I could create worlds that were kinder than the one I lived in. And then he walked in. Jason Wright. Tall, dark-haired, with sharp blue eyes that cut through anyone in his path. He was the kind of guy who never had to try. Girls adored him, guys feared him, teachers gave him a pass even when he didn't deserve it. He ruled the school without ever needing to raise his voice. I'd been invisible to him for most of high school, until that day. Jason's eyes swept over the room until they landed on me. His smirk sharpened and he leaned over to his friends, whispering something that made them laugh. I felt the weight of his gaze on me, but I forced myself to keep drawing. Maybe if I ignored him, he'd leave me alone. I was wrong. Jason stood up, his friends following closely behind. He strode toward me with the confidence of someone who knew he couldn't lose. He slid into the chair across from me, arms crossed over his chest. "What are you doing?" he asked. I didn't look up. "Drawing." "Let me see." I hesitated. My heart started pounding. "It's not finished." "That's okay," he said, reaching for the notebook. I pulled it back. "No." Jason's smirk widened. His friends were gathering now, forming a loose circle around us. The room quieted slightly as more people noticed the unfolding scene. "Come on," Jason said, his voice casual, almost friendly. "We just want to see what's so important that you can't talk to us." "Leave me alone," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. But Jason didn't leave. His hand shot forward, grabbing the notebook out of my grasp before I could react. "Hey." I stood up, my heart in my throat. Jason opened the notebook and began flipping through the pages. My sketches, raw, personal images of my thoughts, my emotions, were exposed under the harsh fluorescent lights. He held up one of the drawings, a sketch of two people locked in an intimate embrace. "Oh wow," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Didn't know you had such a dirty mind." Laughter rippled through the crowd. My cheeks burned. "Give it back," I said, my voice shaking. Jason's grin widened. "Come on, don't be shy. Maybe you should share more of your creative work with the class." More laughter. I lunged for the notebook, but Jason held it above his head. "What's wrong?" he teased. "Shy." Tears blurred my vision. My heart pounded painfully against my ribcage. I could barely breathe. Then he ripped the page out. A gasp escaped me. Jason held the torn page in his hand, waving it like a trophy. Oops. My body moved before my brain could stop me. I grabbed his wrist, trying to wrestle the paper away. But he was stronger. He shoved me back, not hard but enough to make me stumble. I hit the ground, my knees slamming against the cold tile floor. The room erupted in laughter. Jason leaned over, his voice low. "Next time, try not to be so sensitive." I sat there on the floor, broken and humiliated, as he tossed my notebook onto the ground and walked away. No one helped me. No one said anything. They just watched. And in that moment something inside me hardened. I vowed that this would be the last time anyone made me feel weak. That night I sat in my room, the torn pages of my notebook spread across my bed. My hands were shaking. My chest burned with the shame of it all. How could I have let him do that to me? How could I have just sat there while he humiliated me in front of everyone? Tears welled up in my eyes, but I forced them back. Crying wouldn't fix anything. Feeling sorry for myself wouldn't make the pain go away. Jason had power, but not because he deserved it. He had power because people let him have it. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. My long brown hair was a tangled mess. My eyes were red from crying. Weak. That's what Jason saw when he looked at me. But not anymore. I pulled my hair back, exposing my face. I studied the reflection staring back at me and made a promise to myself. I would never let him humiliate me again. I spent the next few weeks rebuilding myself from the inside out. I hit the gym every morning before school. I pushed myself until my muscles ached, until the soreness in my body replaced the sting of humiliation. I changed my wardrobe. Out went the oversized sweaters and faded jeans. I bought fitted dresses, sleek blazers, clothes that made me feel strong. I sharpened my mind too. I threw myself into my schoolwork, acing every test, every assignment. I joined the debate team and made a name for myself as someone who couldn't be outsmarted. And slowly people started noticing. I wasn't invisible anymore. When I walked down the hallways, people moved aside. Girls who used to ignore me now asked where I bought my clothes. Guys who never knew my name started saying hello. Jason noticed too. I saw it in the way his eyes lingered when I passed him in the hallway. In the way his smile tightened when I answered questions in class that he couldn't. It wasn't enough. Not yet. I needed him to feel what it was like to lose control. A month later, the school was hosting a charity event, a formal gala held at the city's biggest hotel. Everyone would be there. Jason would be there. And I would make sure he never forgot me again. The night of the gala, I walked through those grand double doors wearing a black satin dress that hugged my figure. My hair was sleek and loose over my shoulders and diamond studs glinted at my ears. Eyes turned as I walked in. Conversations quieted. Jason was standing near the bar talking with his friends. His eyes widened when he saw me. His gaze darkened. I smiled, slow, deliberate, and walked straight toward him. "Jason," I said, my voice smooth. He blinked. "You look different." "Do I?" I ran a finger down the stem of my champagne glass. Jason's eyes narrowed. He stepped closer. "What game are you playing?" I smiled. "No game. Just thought you'd like to know. You were wrong about me." He studied me, suspicion flickering across his face. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked. I leaned in close, my lips brushing against his ear. "You'll see soon enough." Then I walked away, leaving him standing there, confused, intrigued, and just a little afraid. The night of the gala stayed with me long after the music stopped and the champagne glasses were cleared. I had felt his eyes on me all evening, a burning heat that followed me across the room. Jason wasn't used to being ignored, especially not by someone he had once humiliated. But I wasn't the same girl anymore. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter, but the hunger for revenge hadn't faded. If anything, it had sharpened. Jason was intrigued now, confused by the shift in me, but I needed more than that. I didn't just want his attention. I wanted to dismantle the foundation he stood on. And for that, I needed to get closer. A week after the gala, Jason approached me in the school hallway. It was between classes and the crowd parted around him as usual. Jason Kingston didn't walk through hallways, he owned them. His black jacket was slung casually over one shoulder, his dark hair tousled in a way that was almost too perfect. "Hey," he said, his tone smooth. I ignored him and kept walking. "Wait." Jason's hand brushed my arm and the contact sent a small jolt through me. I hated that my body still responded to him despite everything. I turned, raising a cool eyebrow. "Yes." Jason's smirk returned, slow and dangerous. "You looked different the other night." I smiled faintly. "Did I?" "You've been keeping secrets." I tilted my head. "Maybe." Jason's eyes darkened with curiosity. "Maybe you should share some of those secrets with me." This was the moment. I could have shut him down, walked away with the upper hand. But that wouldn't have been enough. I didn't want to walk away. I wanted to destroy him from the inside. So I smiled. "Maybe I will." Jason's gaze sharpened. He wasn't used to girls playing hard to get, not seriously. The game had begun and he knew it. But what he didn't know was that I was the one holding the deck this time. Over the next few weeks, I let Jason chase me. He'd wait for me outside of class, walk with me through the hallways. He'd sit with me at lunch, his friends eyeing me with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. But I didn't make it easy for him. Whenever he leaned in too close, I would smile and step away. When he texted, I'd wait hours before responding. When he asked me to hang out, I'd tell him I was busy, even when I wasn't. The more I pulled away, the more determined he became. It wasn't long before he started cutting off other girls who flirted with him. He wasn't interested in anyone else anymore, he was focused on me. And that was exactly what I wanted. One night, Jason showed up at my house unexpectedly. It was nearly midnight and I was sitting by the window, sketching by the dim light of a candle. When I heard the soft tap on the glass, I pulled back the curtain and there he was. Jason stood beneath the moonlight, his hands buried in the pockets of his black jacket. His eyes were shadowed, his jaw tight. I opened the window. "What are you doing here?" "I couldn't sleep," he said. "Can I come up?" I hesitated. This wasn't part of the plan. I was supposed to control the narrative, to keep him chasing me, not the other way around. But I nodded. Jason climbed through the window with practiced ease and stood awkwardly in the middle of my room. His eyes drifted over my drawings scattered across the desk. "You're really talented," he said softly. I scoffed. "Is that why you ripped my notebook apart in front of everyone?" Jason winced. "I was an asshole. I know that." I stared at him. His voice was sincere, but sincerity wasn't part of the game. Was it? "Why?" I asked. Jason's expression darkened. "Because I was angry." "Angry? You were different." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "You didn't care about fitting in and it pissed me off." "Why?" "Because I did care." His eyes met mine, raw and exposed. "I hated that you weren't trying to impress anyone. I hated that you didn't care about me." My breath hitched. For the first time, Jason didn't look like the confident king of the school. He looked vulnerable. And it scared me. I turned away. "You should go." Jason hesitated, then stepped toward me. He brushed a hand down my arm and despite myself I shivered. "I'm sorry," he said. I closed my eyes. I wanted to believe him. But this wasn't about forgiveness. This was about revenge. "You should go," I repeated. Jason's jaw tightened, but he nodded. He climbed out of the window, his eyes lingering on me one last time before disappearing into the night. A week later, Jason kissed me for the first time. It was after school, beneath the bleachers. We had stayed late for a school fundraiser and most of the crowd had already left. Jason and I sat side by side on the grass, the cool evening air brushing over our skin. Jason leaned in close. His hand cupped my jaw, his thumb brushing my cheek. "I can't stop thinking about you," he murmured. "You should," I said. "I can't." His breath ghosted over my lips. "Tell me you don't feel the same." I should have pushed him away. I should have ended it there. But I didn't. Jason's lips brushed against mine, soft at first, hesitant. Then deeper. His hand slid into my hair, pulling me closer until there was nothing between us but heat. My heart pounded violently. Every part of me screamed that this was a mistake, that I was losing control. But for the first time in my life I felt powerful. Jason Kingston, the boy who had humiliated me, was now trembling beneath my touch. When he pulled away, his eyes were dark and heavy-lidded. "Come to my place tomorrow night," he said. "No one will be home." My lips curled into a slow smile. Maybe. I had him exactly where I wanted him now. Jason wasn't just interested, he was obsessed. He started showing up at my locker before school. He walked me to my classes, his arms slung possessively around my shoulders. Girls whispered when they saw us together. Guys looked at him with a mix of confusion and envy. Jason Kingston and the quiet girl? It didn't make sense. But that was the point. I was rewriting the story. Jason thought he was in control, but I was the one guiding every move. And then came the night of the party. Jason's parents were out of town. He invited me over, saying it would be small, just a few close friends. When I arrived, the house was packed. Music thumped through the walls and bodies pressed against each other in the dim light. Jason spotted me from across the room and immediately pushed through the crowd toward me. His eyes were dark, hungry. "You came," he said, his hand sliding around my waist. I smiled. "Of course." Jason leaned in, his lips brushing my ear. "Come upstairs." My heart pounded. This was it. The moment everything would shift. I followed him through the house, my hand clasped in his. He led me into his bedroom, closing the door behind us. Jason leaned against the door, his eyes burning into me. What's happening here? I smiled. You'll see soon enough. Then I stepped toward him, pressing my lips against his in a kiss that was slow and dangerous. And Jason, poor foolish Jason, never saw it coming. Jason's bedroom was dark except for the soft glow of the moon filtering through the windows. The sound of the party downstairs was a distant hum, but in that room it was quiet, suffocatingly so. He leaned against the door, his blue eyes dark with anticipation as I stood a few feet away watching him. Jason had no idea how much power I held over him in that moment. I could see it in the tension in his jaw, in the way his breathing quickened when I stepped closer. He thought he had me, thought that this was the moment I would finally give in. He was wrong. I smiled slowly and ran my fingertips down the front of his shirt. His breath hitched. You really think you've won? I murmured. Jason's hand slid around my waist, pulling me closer. His lips hovered just inches from mine. Haven't I? I leaned in so close I could feel the warmth of his breath. Not yet. Jason's mouth curled into a lazy smirk. His hands slid down to my hips, his grip tightening slightly. He thought this was his game, that I was simply playing along. But I wasn't the one who was vulnerable here. Jason Kingston, the boy who once ripped my heart out in front of the entire school, was now in the palm of my hand. And he didn't even know it. Jason's lips brushed against mine and for a moment, I let him have it. His mouth was soft and possessive, his hands sliding down my back. Heat exploded between us, but I controlled it. I pulled back just enough to keep him wanting more. Jason's breath was ragged when I pulled away. What are you doing to me? He asked. My lips curled. Taking back control. Jason's gaze sharpened. His hands moved to cup my face, his thumbs brushing across my cheeks. You could ruin me, he said softly. I smiled. Maybe I will. Jason kissed me harder this time and I let him, for a moment. Then I pulled away again, stepping back with a teasing smile. Is that all? I asked. Jason's eyes darkened. He pushed away from the door and stalked toward me. You're dangerous, he whispered. I backed toward the bed, letting him follow me. And you're just figuring that out now? Jason's hand slid around my waist, pulling me flush against his chest. You're going to destroy me, aren't you? I smiled. Maybe. Jason's mouth crashed against mine. His hands tangled in my hair as he backed me toward the bed. I let him press me down, let him think he was the one in control. But the truth was, I was always in control. Jason wasn't the kind of guy who fell for girls easily. He played the game, toyed with hearts and discarded them without a second thought. But I wasn't like the other girls. Over the next few weeks, Jason fell deeper. I let him think he was the one making the moves. Texting first, waiting for me after class, inviting me to sit with him at lunch. And when I didn't answer his messages right away, he'd come looking for me. Hey, Jason leaned against my locker one afternoon looking frustrated. I glanced at him coolly. What's wrong? You've been ignoring me, he said. I closed my locker and smiled faintly. I've been busy. Jason's hand slid to my waist, his thumb brushing against the exposed skin beneath my shirt. With what? I leaned up toward his ear. With people who don't take me for granted. Jason's jaw tightened. I'm not taking you for granted. Then prove it. Jason's eyes darkened. He leaned in closer, his mouth brushing the edge of my jaw. What do you want from me? I want you, I whispered. All of you. Jason's eyes narrowed, calculating. You already have me. Not yet. Jason stared at me for a moment longer, searching my face. Then he kissed me, hard and desperate, right there in the hallway where everyone could see. Girls stared. Whispers floated through the hall. Jason Kingston, the king of the school, was hooked. Exactly as planned. But not everything was going according to plan. Because Jason wasn't supposed to make me feel this way. At first it was easy. Flirting with him, letting him chase me, it was all part of the game. But then there were moments that didn't feel like a game anymore. Like the night he showed up outside my window at 2 a.m. looking lost and angry. I need to see you, he had said. His voice was low and rough, like he'd been fighting with someone. I let him in and he sat on the edge of my bed, his hands running through his dark hair. "My parents are getting a divorce," he whispered. I sat beside him. "I'm sorry." Jason's gaze met mine, raw and vulnerable. "I don't know why I'm telling you this." "Because you trust me," I said softly. Jason's jaw tightened. He leaned toward me, resting his forehead against mine. "I don't trust anyone," he whispered. "Then why are you here?" Jason's hand slid into my hair. His mouth hovered near mine. "Because I can't stay away from you." I kissed him then, because it was the only way to quiet the ache growing in my chest. But when he pulled me down onto the bed, his hands moving over my body, I let him. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to. It was never supposed to be like this. Jason was supposed to be a means to an end, a trophy to collect, a lesson to teach. But now I could feel myself slipping. Jason would touch my hand during class and my heart would skip. He'd laugh at one of my sarcastic remarks and I'd feel that warm bloom in my chest. And then there were the nights he would hold me. No games, no seduction, just his arms wrapped around me while we lay beneath the stars. "I don't deserve you," he whispered one night. "I know," I said. Jason laughed. "You don't make this easy, you know that?" "I'm not supposed to." Jason brushed a hand down my hair. "I think I'm falling in love with you." My heart twisted painfully. I should have pulled away. I should have ended it right there. But I didn't. The school's biggest event of the year was coming up, the senior winter ball. Jason had asked me to be his date and I had agreed. But that wasn't part of the plan. The plan had been to humiliate him, to make him feel the same pain I had felt. And then the perfect opportunity fell into my lap. 2 nights before the ball, I found out that Jason's father had been involved in a major scandal. Illegal business deals, money laundering, the works. It was all over the local news. I knew how much Jason's reputation mattered to him. How much it would crush him to see his name dragged through the mud. And all I had to do was leak the details. Jason trusted me. He had told me things he had never told anyone else. I had the leverage to destroy him completely. All I had to do was make the call. And for a moment I actually considered it. But then I remembered the way Jason had looked at me the night he said he loved me. The way his arms had wrapped around me like I was the only thing keeping him from breaking apart. Could I really do that to him? My phone buzzed. A text from Jason. "I can't wait to see you at the ball." My fingers hovered over the screen. And for the first time since this started, I didn't know what to do. The winter ball was held at the Grand Terrace Hotel, a place dripping with wealth and elegance. Chandeliers glittered from the high ceilings, casting golden light over the massive ballroom. Waiters in crisp white shirts carried trays of champagne through the crowd, and the sound of a string quartet blended with the low hum of conversation. I stood at the entrance, dressed in a deep red satin gown that clung to every curve. My hair was styled in loose waves over my shoulders, and diamond earrings sparkled beneath the soft light. Heads turned as I walked into the room. Girls whispered behind manicured hands and guys stared. But I wasn't looking at them. I was looking for him. Jason was across the room, standing with a group of his friends near the bar. He wore a fitted black tuxedo, his dark hair neatly styled, and his blue eyes sweeping the room like a predator surveying his territory. When his eyes met mine, something in his expression shifted. His gaze darkened, sharpening with a dangerous intensity. Jason excused himself from the group and started toward me, his pace measured and deliberate. When he reached me, his hand slid around my waist, pulling me against him. "You're late," he said. I smiled. I wanted to make an entrance. Jason's gaze slid down the length of me, heat flickering behind his eyes. "You succeeded." His hand brushed the bare skin of my back. Even through the thin silk of my dress, I could feel the heat of his touch. My body responded instinctively, heart racing, breath hitching. "I think you enjoy torturing me," Jason said, his voice low and rough. "Maybe." Jason's lips curled. "Careful," he murmured. "You might find yourself at my mercy tonight." I smiled. "I doubt that." Jason laughed softly, but there was an edge to it. He leaned down, his mouth brushing my ear. "Dance with me." I let him lead me onto the dance floor. The music slowed and Jason's hand slid to the small of my back as his other hand curled around mine. We moved together, our bodies pressed close. Every step felt charged with tension, like we were seconds away from losing control. Jason's gaze lingered on my mouth. "You're playing with fire. Maybe I want to get burned." Jason's hand tightened on my waist. His mouth lowered toward mine. My breath hitched. And then the music cut off. A harsh crackle of feedback echoed through the ballroom. And then a voice, cold and emotionless, filled the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special surprise for you tonight." Jason's body tensed beneath my hands. A ripple of confusion passed through the crowd. Then the projector flickered to life. Jason's face appeared on the massive screen at the front of the room. Not the polished, confident version of him that everyone knew, but a video clip. His face was pale, his eyes wide and haunted. His father's voice, angry, cutting, filled the room. "You've ruined everything, Jason. Do you have any idea what you've done? Our entire future is hanging by a thread because of you." The clip shifted to a news broadcast. Jason Wright's father has been linked to a series of illegal business deals, potentially implicating the Wright family in a multi-million-dollar financial scandal. Gasps rippled through the room. People were turning toward Jason now, eyes wide, whispers growing louder. Jason's face had gone completely still. My chest tightened. I had known about the scandal for weeks, known that I could have used it to destroy him. But I hadn't. Someone else had. Jason's gaze whipped toward me. His blue eyes sharpened with betrayal. "You knew about this," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "Jason. You knew." His jaw clenched. His eyes were ice cold now, the warmth gone. "Did you set this up?" My breath caught. "No." "Then who did?" I opened my mouth, but before I could answer, Jason stepped back. His eyes narrowed, cutting through me like a blade. "Maybe this was the plan all along," he said softly. My heart twisted painfully. "Jason. I trusted you." His eyes darkened. "I let you in." "Jason, I didn't." But he was already walking away, his broad shoulders tense beneath his tuxedo jacket. He pushed through the crowd and disappeared through the ballroom doors. I stumbled into the hallway after him. The elegant marble floors and gold-trimmed walls blurred beneath the tears burning in my eyes. "Jason." I found him standing at the end of the corridor, his back to me. His shoulders were tense, his fists curled at his sides. "Jason, please." He turned slowly. His expression was cold, closed off. A mask of control. "You knew about this?" he asked. "Yes," I admitted. "But I didn't." Jason's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Of course you knew." "I didn't tell anyone," I said desperately. "I wouldn't do that to you." "But you were planning to." My breath hitched. Jason's eyes narrowed. "Was this all part of the game?" "No," I shook my head. "It started as a game, but it's not anymore." Jason stepped toward me. His eyes blazed with anger, but beneath it I saw the hurt. "You were planning to destroy me," he said. "And what? Changed your mind because you started to care." I swallowed hard. Jason's mouth curled into a bitter smile. "I guess you're not as cold as you thought you were." My throat tightened painfully. Jason's hand shot out, bracing against the wall beside my head. His body pressed close, but this time it wasn't desire in his gaze. It was fury. "You used me," he said. His voice was low, dangerous. I couldn't breathe. Jason's hand slid down to my jaw. His thumb brushed against my skin, a cruel echo of the tenderness he had once shown me. "I let you in," he said. His voice was sharp and cutting now. "That was my mistake." Tears burned in my eyes. "Jason, I swear." But he pushed away from me. Jason's expression hardened. He turned and walked down the hallway without another word. I didn't follow. The next day at school, the whispers were deafening. Everyone knew about the scandal now. About Jason's father, about the Wright family's crumbling empire. Jason was no longer untouchable. Jason wasn't at school. I didn't expect him to be. But the fallout was everywhere. Jason's friends were avoiding him. Teachers were talking in hushed tones. I was back to being invisible. When I walked through the hallways, people stared. I heard the whispers. The rumors. She used him. She planned the whole thing. No wonder he's gone. I sat alone at lunch. I deserved that, didn't I? I had wanted to destroy Jason. I had wanted him to suffer the way I had suffered. And now he was. But why did it feel so hollow? That night I stood in front of Jason's house. The lights were off, but I could see the faint glow of a television through the front window. I climbed the steps and knocked. No answer. I knocked again. Finally the door opened. Jason stood there, his hair messy, his shirt rumpled. He stared at me for a long moment. "What are you doing here?" he asked flatly. "I needed to see you," I said. Jason's eyes darkened. "Why?" "Because I never meant to hurt you," I whispered. "And I think I—" Jason's jaw tightened. "Don't say it." "I think I love you." Jason's eyes sharpened. And then he pulled me inside, slamming the door behind us. Jason's hand shot out, pulling me inside his house before I could even process what was happening. The door slammed shut behind us with a heavy thud. My back hit the wall and Jason's body was pressed against mine, all heat and tension and unspoken fury. His hands gripped my waist hard enough that it almost hurt, but I didn't push him away. I couldn't. His breathing was ragged. His eyes, dark, wild, searched mine like he was looking for answers or maybe confirmation that this wasn't some cruel trick. "You think you love me?" Jason's voice was low and dangerous. "I know I do," I whispered. Jason's gaze sharpened. His hand slid up, threading into my hair, tugging just hard enough to make my breath hitch. "You're a liar," he said. "You've been lying to me since the beginning." "I know," I whispered. "And I'm sorry." Jason's jaw tightened. "You played me." "Yes." "You set me up." "Yes." Jason's lips curled into a bitter smile. "And now you expect me to believe you love me?" Tears burned at the corners of my eyes. My hands pressed against his chest, but I didn't push him away. "Yes," I said softly. "Because I do." Jason's hand curled tighter into my hair. His mouth hovered near mine, his breath rough and shallow. "You don't deserve me." "No," I said. "But I want you anyway." Jason's mouth crashed against mine, rough and unyielding. It wasn't soft. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate and angry and aching, like he was trying to punish me with the kiss. And maybe I deserved it. But I kissed him back. Jason's hand slid down my back, his fingers digging into my skin as his mouth moved over mine. My arms wrapped around his neck and I pulled him closer, gasping against the intensity of it all. His hands were everywhere, cupping my face, sliding down my hips, gripping me like he needed me just to stay upright. "You've ruined me," Jason murmured against my lips. My chest tightened painfully. "I know." Jason's mouth softened. His hands slid up to cradle my face. His forehead pressed against mine as his breathing slowed. "You scare me," he whispered. "I'm scared too," I admitted. Jason pulled back, his blue eyes sharp and guarded. "Do you even know what you're asking from me?" "Yes," I said. "But I don't care." Jason's lips brushed against mine one last time before he pulled away completely. His expression darkened. "You should," he said. Then he turned and walked toward the stairs, leaving me breathless and shaking. Jason didn't speak to me for 3 days after that night. He wasn't at school. His friends didn't seem to know where he was, or if they did, they weren't talking. I told myself that I'd given him space, that he needed time to figure out how he felt about me after everything I'd done. But the truth was I was scared. Because Jason wasn't the only one falling anymore. I had started this whole thing as a game, a twisted plan for revenge, and somewhere along the way I had lost control. I had let myself feel too much. And now I didn't know how to stop. The humiliation, the revenge, none of it mattered anymore. All I cared about was him. And that terrified me. I found Jason at the abandoned basketball court behind the school. He was sitting on the edge of the bleachers, his elbows resting on his knees, head bowed. A cigarette dangled loosely from his fingers, the tip glowing faintly in the dim light of the setting sun. "Smoking's bad for you," I said. Jason's head lifted slowly. His gaze met mine, shadowed and dark beneath the soft orange haze of twilight. "I don't care," he said. I sat down next to him close enough that our knees touched. He didn't move away. I didn't leak the story about your father, I said quietly. Jason's jaw tightened. His gaze flicked toward me. I know, he said after a long pause. Relief washed over me, but it didn't last long. Jason leaned back against the bleachers, his gaze drifting toward the sky. His cigarette burned down between his fingers. My father's going to jail, he said. Did you know that? I inhaled sharply. No. Jason's mouth twisted. Not that it matters. He deserves it. I'm sorry, I said. Jason's eyes flashed. Don't be. I hesitated. What happens now? Jason's gaze sharpened. For him. No, I whispered. For us. Jason's smile was bitter. You still think there's an us, after everything? My throat tightened. Yes. Jason's gaze darkened. He sat up, leaning toward me until his face was inches from mine. I don't trust you, he said. My heart clenched painfully. I know. Jason's hand slid to the side of my face, brushing a loose strand of hair behind my ear. His thumb lingered against my cheek. I don't trust you, he repeated. But I can't stop wanting you. I exhaled shakily. Then don't stop. Jason's mouth curled. He leaned closer, his lips brushing against mine. Not kissing me, just teasing. You could ruin me, he murmured. I already have, I whispered. Jason's mouth finally met mine. Soft this time, but just as intense. His hand slid to the back of my neck, pulling me closer. And for a moment nothing else mattered. Jason and I were inseparable after that night. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't talk about his father. We didn't talk about the fact that I had started this whole thing with the intention of destroying him. We just existed. Together. Jason would pick me up after school and we'd drive to the cliffs overlooking the ocean. He'd smoke while I sketched, and sometimes we'd sit there for hours without saying a word. Other times we couldn't keep our hands off each other. Jason would show up at my window late at night and I'd let him in without a word. He'd climb into bed with me, his body pressed against mine beneath the blankets. You're dangerous, he murmured against my skin one night. So are you, I whispered. Jason smiled darkly. That's why this works. It was too good to last. I should have known better. It started with a rumor. Someone said Jason's father had cut a deal, that the charges were going away, that the Wright family's fortune was safe. Jason became colder after that. Distant. He stopped texting me as much. He stopped waiting for me after class. And then one afternoon I saw him standing at his locker, talking to her. Emily Crane. His ex-girlfriend. She was blonde and perfect and smiling up at him the way I used to. Jason's hand touched her arm and something inside me twisted painfully. I walked toward them, heart pounding. Jason. His gaze shifted toward me, sharp and guarded. Hey, he said coolly. Emily smiled sweetly. Oh. Hey. What's going on? I asked. Jason's gaze sharpened. Nothing. Emily's hand brushed his arm. We were just catching up. I stared at Jason. His eyes were cold now. Empty. You should go, Jason said. My heart fractured. What? Jason's mouth curled into a cruel smile. This was fun, but we're done here. My breath caught. Jason. You knew what this was, he said. And just like that. Jason walked away. Jason walked away without looking back. I stood there, frozen in the middle of the hallway, surrounded by whispers and judgmental glances. My chest felt hollow, as if someone had carved out my insides and left only a cold, aching void. Emily Crane's smile was still etched into my mind, that triumphant little smirk that told me she had won. But it wasn't about her. It was about Jason. He had destroyed me just as I had once planned to destroy him. The difference was I had fallen first. I had fallen so hard. My legs were trembling beneath me as I stumbled toward the bathroom. I locked myself inside a stall, pressing my hands against the cool metal door, trying to steady my breathing. Don't cry. Don't cry. Don't give him that satisfaction. But it was too late. Tears slid down my cheeks. My chest heaved painfully. My hands curled into fists, nails digging into my palms. I had thought I was strong, thought I was in control. But Jason had taken that power and twisted it into something ugly and sharp. And now I was left bleeding. Jason didn't speak to me for days. At school he was colder than ever, detached and distant. He sat with his friends at lunch, laughing like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't meant anything to him. Emily was always there, hanging on his arm, smiling like the cat that had caught the mouse. I hated her. But I hated myself more. As I had seen this coming. Jason had always been dangerous. He had always held the upper hand, even when I thought I was the one in control. But it was different now. Because now I knew what it felt like to really love someone, and to have that love ripped away. I stopped trying to talk to him. I stopped trying to fix it. Instead I focused on surviving. I went back to sitting alone at lunch. I stopped wearing the clothes that made me feel powerful. I retreated back into my old patterns, quiet, unnoticed, invisible. But it didn't work. Because now people knew my name. They remembered the rumors, remembered the scandal, remembered that I had once been the girl wrapped around Jason Kingston's finger. And Jason, he acted like I didn't even exist. It was late one night when everything came to a head. I was walking home alone after studying at the library. The streets were empty, the glow of the streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement. My heels clicked against the sidewalk, the cool autumn air brushing against my skin. I was halfway home when I heard footsteps behind me. I stopped and turned, and there he was. He stood beneath the dim glow of a street lamp, his hands buried in the pockets of his black jacket. His dark hair was a little messy, his blue eyes shadowed beneath the soft light. "What do you want?" I asked. My voice was sharp, defensive. Jason's gaze was intense, his mouth set in a hard line. "We need to talk." I crossed my arms. "I think we're past that." Jason took a step closer. "You're angry." I laughed bitterly. "Wow. What gave it away?" Jason's mouth curled into a faint, humorless smile. "You knew this was never going to last." My heart twisted painfully. "And why is that?" Jason's eyes darkened. "Because you wanted revenge. And I gave it to you." My chest tightened. "That's not fair." Jason's expression sharpened. "Isn't it?" I stepped toward him, my pulse pounding in my ears. "I never betrayed you." Jason's jaw tightened. "No? Then what was the plan exactly?" I swallowed hard. "At first, to humiliate you. To make you feel the way you made me feel." Jason's eyes flashed dangerously. "And then?" I took a shaky breath. "And then, I fell in love with you." Jason's expression hardened. "Too bad it wasn't enough." My throat tightened painfully. "You never gave me a chance." Jason's gaze sharpened. "And why would I? After everything you did." Tears burned at the corners of my eyes. "Because you love me too." Jason's mouth twisted into a bitter smile. "And what if I do?" I swallowed hard. "Then stop running." Jason's eyes darkened. He stepped toward me, so close that his breath ghosted across my skin. His hand slid into my hair, his fingers curling at the base of my neck. "I don't know how to stop," he whispered. My chest tightened painfully. "Then let me help you." Jason's mouth hovered over mine. His hand tightened in my hair. "You scare me," he whispered. "You scare me too," I whispered back. Jason's lips brushed against mine, soft at first, then deeper. His arms wrapped around me and I melted into him, my hands clutching at the back of his jacket. This kiss wasn't like the others. It wasn't desperate or angry. It was vulnerable. And that scared me more than anything else. Jason pulled back, his hands still cradling my face. His gaze was dark and sharp, searching. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. My heart pounded. "What?" Jason's jaw tightened. His gaze drifted toward the ground. "My father, he's not going to jail," he said. I frowned. "What are you talking about?" Jason's gaze darkened. "The charges were dropped." My stomach twisted painfully. "How?" Jason's eyes lifted to mine. "Because he made a deal." My mouth went dry. "What kind of deal?" Jason's expression hardened. "The kind that comes with strings attached." My chest tightened painfully. "Jason." "My father cut me off," Jason said. His mouth curled into a bitter smile. He said I'm a liability. I swallowed hard. What does that mean? It means that everything I thought was mine, the money, the house, the power, it's gone. My heart pounded painfully. Jason. Jason's eyes sharpened. He said I was weak. You're not weak, I said softly. Jason's hand slid to my jaw, his thumb brushing against my cheek. His gaze softened just slightly. I never thought I'd fall for you, Jason murmured. I smiled faintly. Neither did I. Jason's mouth hovered over mine. And now? I leaned closer. Now it's too late. Jason kissed me again, slower this time, more deliberate. His hands slid down my back and I curled my arms around his neck. I'm not going to let you go, Jason whispered against my lips. Good, I whispered back. Jason and I weren't perfect. He had broken me once. I had betrayed him. We had hurt each other in ways that couldn't be erased. But we were learning how to rebuild. Jason walked away from his father's legacy. He started working for a local business. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to stand on his own for the first time in his life. Me. I stopped hiding. I started showing my art, displaying my sketches in school exhibitions. People stopped looking at me like a victim and started seeing me as someone who had survived. Jason and I still fought sometimes, but we always came back to each other. One night, Jason showed up at my window again. He climbed inside and sat on the edge of my bed. I'm scared, he admitted. I sat beside him. Me too. Jason smiled faintly. But you're not going anywhere? Never. Jason's hand curled around mine. And this time, we weren't playing a game anymore. This time it was real. Think.